Oh my god, we're back.
We're back.
We're back. Took longer than we thought.
Those of you who are listening to this in the future don't care.
Future listeners don't care, but we thought we could just take our busy move, our New York to Brooklyn move, and we could just take a couple weeks and get around that and all the other things we had going on and just come right back.
Turns out moving really sucks.
And it just didn't happen. So we said we'd be back in the beginning of May. And we also thought that was very safe too. Beginning of May, we'd have stockpiled some episodes. So we'd be safe to keep up our twice a week pace.
We'll get there. But we're back now.
But to give you some sense of continuity, or not continuity, but where we are in time for our future listeners, we are at a point where last night the finale to Game of Thrones came out, and it was so horrible that we just had to follow up the next day with returning to Sopranos.
Yeah.
And we thought that at this point, like I said, we would have a bunch stockpiled and we'd be well into our 6A season, but we just aren't. And we're starting later than we thought we'd be putting them out. But that's okay. And you know what? That was great, and it refreshed myself after the horrible writing that is the conclusion of that show. So thank you.
Maybe we will do a
Thank you, Terrence
podcast
Winter.
on how terrible it is.
Yeah, we could do a podcast on how shitty
But
that season was.
all that being said, we had some very nice listeners send us emails asking us when we were going to come back.
Today, just this afternoon, we think nobody listens to this show. We don't think we have any future listeners. But then we got 2 emails in an hour of people wanting us to come back, checking in if we were okay. So, we
we're
are
okay.
We're fine. We were just moving and busy, and we got behind. But at this point, to our future listeners, it's probably the wild future of June 2019. And we wish you happy future, June. Whatever it is.
Sure. So we're going to jump into season 6A.
We're here, yeah. And, and part of this, too, I think, is that we also didn't want to rush into 6 because we just have so much respect for it. It's a lot of my favorite episodes are in season 6, and I think we didn't want to do that at a time where we couldn't fully commit to it. And it's great to be watching it now where we actually feel like we can kind of devote ourselves to it a little bit more and not be frantic and having our focus kind of away from the excellence that is season 6 of Sopranos, because it's kind of amazing.
I think we will do this season in part A and B. We haven't really discussed this actually, so we can discuss it right now.
That's how things work.
While I see the validity in treating them as a full season in itself, there was a break, and there is a jump in between 6A and 6B. So I don't know. Maybe
I see them differently.
Yeah, maybe we'll do a season 6A recap, and then we'll do.
This is really
a 6B.
only going to impact people who are OCD about the number of season, how it's listed.
Yeah, I don't know, but
Maybe we'll have a 6A discussion.
But that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Like if we're going to break it down that way or not.
Okay.
Because I do think this is kind of, again, having just watched far inferior show's season finale, I was trying to find the interesting bits in their character arcs, and I couldn't help but compare it to the way we kind of come to the conclusion of our characters' arcs in The Sopranos, and how much richer and more complex and realistic they are. So I just think, anyways, it's just such a great seasons.
It is, yeah. And it was just it was a pleasure to get back into it. So it's been a while for us that we've seen Sopranos.
Yeah, I feel rusty, but
so our Sopranos trivia might be loose, but that's okay. That's not what matters.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start?
Let's start with kind of that intro sequence, right? I don't know. Maybe we'll jump around a little bit more to talk about different kinds of themes in themselves, but the show definitely comes out swinging with a really different intro sequence than we've been accustomed to.
Very different, yeah. No newspaper.
Kind of like a
montage
montage that we've seen before.
Yeah.
We've seen that kind of character montage. Oh, it's also fitting that we took a break because, of course, this was the longest break between seasons.
Right.
For David Chase and the team.
Right.
So that's why we took such a long break.
We wanted to make you wait a little bit too long, too.
Yeah. But yes, so we jump back in with this montage that's scored over by a really interesting, like, spoken word / musical piece that's about this Egyptian concept of the 7 souls. I was trying to, like, frantically jot down some of those things.
There's definitely a lot there, and
we can probably revisit it throughout the season, but
yeah, I mean, in past viewings, I've also kind of like looked into it, and there's definitely a lot of theories about what's going on there. So, I mean, you can definitely get pretty deep into it. I found it interesting on this viewing to actually be listening to the lyrics, the concept of this first soul, where they're talking about Ren, talking about the director of your life, the kind of like this like parallel between the end of life and the end of the show, like an acknowledgement that we are entering into the final part of this show. Like this show is actually entering kind of like its death stage.
And that's the first one to leave. It's the first soul to leave is like the director or the team behind it.
Right. And as we know,
and this show then has been left with us
Sopranos
for a long time.
ended and faded to black, there has been
spoiler.
I'm just saying, that's just something you say, is that just fate as it ended.
Yeah.
There are multiple levels of interpretation of the show. Because I think that David Chase basically moved on as the creator of the show, but I think that the impact of The Sopranos has even been interpreted in different ways as time has gone on. I think people saw it differently at that time than they have now and at different times.
Well, totally. But like, again, like, this is a show that's just been, like, and I realize it more and more, like, that it's just been left with me for a really long time and for lots of viewers for a very long time, right? So, like, like, David Chase is on and doing whatever he's doing. But I like how they kind of talked through these 7 souls. I didn't jot them all down, but, like, the second soul losing, like, your energy and your power. The 4th one being the heart, right? And then like the 5th one being a guide through the land of the dead. Like this show for me does kind of like give me all those elements there, right? Like it deals with these huge issues. The
show guides you through the land of the dead.
Kind of like this. Actually, this show gives you huge like things to ponder about, like death. What happens after you die and like different kind of viewpoints on that. So like, and you have characters who die, right? It's not like in your everyday life that you have that many people who are dying, I hope.
Right.
You know, and so it like allows you to grapple with some of the and like, you know, put yourself in the shoes of some of these characters who you know, in this episode, characters who you've just met today. In some cases, you know, like in the case of like Chris and Adriana, characters who you've like seen together and grown to love together for the whole show. But yeah, anyways, that's kind of it's here nor there. I think like, but I think that was definitely part of it for David Chase and the team.
Yeah, and interestingly, in this episode specifically, there is a focus on death, and I feel like there's this parallel and kind of comparison between Eugene and Tony in this episode. So taking it at the end where Eugene has hung himself and Tony has been shot, and they're both kind of grasping for life. Eugene, as soon as he makes this decision to end his life, you see his responses to kind of fight that, and that his instinct is actually to preserve onto life, similar to the way that Tony does. And I feel like there's kind of a parallel between those two characters dealing with death. We don't know what happens to Tony at this point, but there are a lot of parallels between those two. Even where the last line of the episode from 911 is, "Where is the emergency?" Actually, it's interesting because for me it makes me think about, well, here's two characters who are dealing with an emergency that we are witnessing. Which one is the emergency? Like, which one is more valid? We're more invested in Tony Soprano. Eugene is kind of a new character. He's been around, but he's fully kind of expanded. And
well, we'll talk about how we've got this, like, all of a sudden, like, now we're, like, very invested in this guy and his family. Yeah. Right? We get this, like, this storyline that's very focused on characters who we really don't know at all. Yeah. Right? And that has all sorts of interesting stuff for me to talk about later. But I do. Yeah, I think that's really about like where is the emergency? Like where like
which death
or
is more valid?
What's more tragic or what's more
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What is more tragic? And I think it's an interesting question to ask ourselves because why would Tony's death be more tragic? Well, we're more invested in him, but at the same time he's also committed all these horrible actions. So why actually would his death be that tragic? You know, Eugene actually comes out of a scene shortly before that where he's actually kind of like trying to make things right a little bit, like with his wife, where he's at least trying to come up with alternatives. He's not a good guy by any stretch of the imagination, but Tony basically shows no empathy to him and just basically shuts down his dreams. I think that Eugene kind of has one of those moments, almost like Vin Makazian or all these other characters who right before they die, there's some kind of like redeeming qualities that are given to them as characters. And yeah, it kind of makes me wonder like, okay, well, why would we be so much more blown away by Tony's being shot than this happening to Eugene, other than just an investment of time?
And they're like really back to back.
I think that they are very very much like an intention of creating a parallel between them.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Let's finish talking about that intro sequence, because I think it does kind of set the stage for this season and a lot of the different storylines. Let's come back to that.
Right. I'm getting derailed. All right.
Yeah.
Sopranos organization skills are lacking.
So during this spoken word poetry, I don't know, about the Seven Souls, we see the first character we see is Agent Harris. Puking.
Well, in the first line of the episode is nobody ever went broke underestimating the intelligence of the American public, and then we have Harris vomiting.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that happens in the season.
Yeah.
So there is an aspect for me of this kind of like acknowledgement of this being a mass market show, and there's something that actually kind of plays into that.
Yeah.
It kind of in some ways actually does. This is going to be like the weird comparison to Game of Thrones because it just happened. But just in that's a show that developed a huge audience. And this is a show that developed a huge audience. And what's really interesting is the other is a show that started with themes that I feel are rather subtle, dealing with people's rationalizations for their behavior, for politics, for these kind of under the surface things, and building these kind of like complexities around that. And it ended up being this very hyper literal action based show as it became a mass market show. And I'm sure there's a lot of pressures from studios. There's a really interesting interview we heard recently with writers from Lost dealing with the realities of what the studio was throwing at them. The pressure as this became this phenomenon. And I acknowledge that must be hard. Sopranos obviously had to deal with that too, but I feel like they maintained their soul and their essence.
I think they like took that and put it into their art.
Yeah,
I feel like they like took that and like made it commentary. You know?
Exactly.
And so like I don't think they lost viewers. Like I think it was done so skillfully that
I agree.
They're able to like pass comment on people watching. And it does kind of like break down that whatever they call it, the third wall or whatever that fourth wall.
I think,
whatever, one of the breaking down some kind of wall where they're very like self-aware as creators, whatever you want to, of whatever kind you want to call them. So like, I think like even that reference to the first level of your soul being the director, I think was really, I don't know, like putting that out there. Also dealing with kind of like the, I don't know, materialism and stuff like that of just like Americans in general. Yeah. And consumers, like consumers of media and consumers of products. I think definitely like this season does touch on that kind of stuff too. So we see Agent Harris, we see Vito has lost a bunch of weight, which is also kind of like reality show-esque. Like we see him holding his pants out like in that shot, you know, and he's talking a bunch about the Atkins diet throughout the episode. We have Janice and Bobby who have had a baby. And we see this like view of Janice's boobs, right? Like with her tattoo and then this baby that's kind of like clinging to them, and again kind of like going back to that like birth and death like he talks about in Melfi's office later, right? We kind of see these ends of the spectrum in people's lives. We see Bobby with his trains, which is a really funny part of this season. We see Eugene, right, which again like is kind of like surprising on your first viewing of this episode, maybe, because you're like, oh, Eugene and and your wife, like it's kind of like, oh, okay.
I remember getting to that part of the episode,
and they're like opening an envelope, and so you're like, oh, that's interesting, and then you go on, you have characters that you do know, like Meadow doing a sexy dance, and like I guess Ray Curto is in there too, which again, he's kind of, you know.
Yeah.
You have AJ, you have Adriana appearing in a dream of Carmela, right? So like all the other characters, you're like really, you're interested to see what's been going on with them.
Yeah.
You're not as like invested in Eugene Pontecorvo as a viewer.
So it's an interesting decision to include that.
And so I think that's that kind of like meta level thing. It's like playing with, it's like, here viewers, like, this is this guy who's been like implicated in all this stuff that's been going on, right? He's been there for all this action on the sidelines, but like his life is also implicated. Like you didn't care because we didn't tell you that story and you didn't care, but like now we're gonna make you care about this guy you didn't care about before.
And it's ambitious, right? To be entering your final season,
so good.
And to take the first episode and to introduce basically a new character. It's crazy.
It's amazing. It's great. It's so great.
Yeah, it takes guts to do that. Because, I mean, you know, there's so much pressure to be wrapping things up. Granted, they have a lot of episodes left, but even still, you know, it plays into the way that they're constantly playing with form and seasons.
Yeah.
And doing interesting things and playing with characters' arcs, and it's great.
Yeah, just amazing. Yeah, like that. So for me, that's kind of, again, that kind of like, you know, fourth wall stuff. It's like looking at you as the viewer also. Yeah, so some time has passed.
It has.
And things are, I don't know, like on the whole, we're kind of...
How are things?
How are things? I'm just trying to, I mean, things aren't great. Tony doesn't seem that well.
No.
Nobody seems that well.
No, I mean, do they ever?
No. But on the outside, again, kind of that, like, viewership thing. Like, Tony and Carmela are going for sushi. They have this sushi place.
On the surface, things seem to be going well for them. I mean, Tony even acknowledges it. He says, you know, we're very lucky. And, you know, but he's also assessing how lucky they are based on the fact that they're eating expensive fish. And I think that plays into this, like, consumerist theme of this episode where people are trying to make themselves happy with these superficial things that don't work. And I think that that's a really key part of the episode, be it with the Porsche for Carmela, be it the Corvette for Angie Bonpensero, you know, be it the Florida house for Eugene Pontecorvo. There's a lot of examples, even the trains for Bobby. Everybody needs this outlet, and a lot of them are investing in these kind of shallow status symbols.
Even the Atkins diet, like weight loss, like being thin.
I think almost everybody has something, but you know, even with Eugene, like they get money, right? And they're thrilled, they're so happy. But then immediately we see that there's this difficult relationship with his son. He has rage issues. He throws the candy bowl. There's no solution for that for something easy like money. And all these characters are chasing these things that make them happy, but it really doesn't, and it's very shallow, and it doesn't really do anything.
Did we know that Eugene Pontecorvo was a rat?
No,
we didn't.
No.
Okay, just checking.
No,
because like it's, again, that's what's hard about going back and rewatching, is you're like, when do we find that out again?
Right.
But we see, like, he's just like bound by so many. He's just like being pulled in so many directions right now. Like we know, and he now has this wife and family that we had no clue about before, who, you know, has been supporting him doing his work up until now, but they've always had this dream of, they seem to really like the beach. They have like a lot of like beach shells in their home and like happy family memories on the beach, and
that's right.
It seems like that's a place where they're very like normal, and like they're very like their problems don't exist in this hypothetical beach world, right? It's like kind of like a heaven kind of place, and there's just no way for them to get there. And so we like slowly see, like, okay, like he has to get past this Tony thing. He has to you know, hopefully they get this house. They're worried about not getting the house. But then, of course, we find out that he's also, like, the FBI is basically saying, like, you can't have that dream. Like, you're not ever going to be free from anyone.
Yeah.
And so we see him just really, like, stuck. And, like, not able to escape himself, like this kind of like prison that he's in, right? We have Johnny Sack in an actual prison, but he's, you know, Eugene's also in a prison of his own stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And we see like it's just like this, like their scenes with them are just so incredible. Like that scene where they find the drugs that the son is using and stuff like that, and they're like, you know, is it going to be better in Florida? Right. So they, like, you can see like this whole family kind of has this like image of like another life, like something else that could totally be a possibility for them, and it just isn't.
Yeah.
It's this big pipe dream.
Yeah. There's something interesting for me too with that, where Eugene is in this desperate situation and he just kind of receives no empathy from anybody. Like everybody kind of needs something from him. So even his wife, you know, Deanna, says like, I'm going to die if we don't get this house. Meanwhile, Eugene in the end of the episode actually does end up dead. Basically for not getting the house, but he's basically like protecting this kind of this
maybe
dream
like
a little
they
bit.
can go and get the house now that he's dead.
Maybe. It's a happy ending.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That's how I kind of interpret it.
Yeah.
It's like he sees them, like he's like looking at those pictures, he's looking at the shells and this kind of like image of a happy family, and like because of him they can't really have that.
Right.
And the son's on drugs and the daughter sees this violence, and you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, no, definitely. It's interesting, the relationship between Eugene and Tony, because I think it's strengthened almost immediately in the episode, and then it just kind of like builds this relationship between them as they both go through something kind of similar. Like in the very beginning, Eugene talking to Tony in that scene where he gives him the watches, and we get references, you know, about the history that they have together, how much time they've spent going back to CYO basketball.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting scene for me and an interesting dynamic, because Eugene had been blessed with this like good fortune, and he has this dream that he wants, and it's an opportunity for Tony to show empathy for somebody and to help somebody out.
Yeah.
And he doesn't do that. So when
he can't do that. He can't allow other people to like pursue their dreams or build their happiness or whatever.
And Eugene's wife actually acknowledges that a little bit when she says, well, she says a lot of things, but one thing that's interesting is when she says he has to see that this is a huge opportunity for us. And clearly he doesn't.
No.
So there's some strengthening of and development of Tony's character here, where it's just down like this road where it just kind of keeps on getting worse. Or maybe it's just exactly what we already knew.
Yeah.
He's just incapable of doing something good for somebody else.
No, absolutely not, right? And he feels like he's the one who needs to catch a break, right? Like, he can't acknowledge the ways in which, you know.
Meanwhile, right after he says, you know, why can't I catch a break? Then you have Ray Curto dying.
Just dying.
You know, as he's about to hand over these tapes on the Angelo Giacalone. Oh, God. I'm going to piss somebody off. I can piss off Italian people. Oh, God.
Well, I don't know.
Giacalone.
I don't know why you're, like, reading it.
Yeah, I didn't need to do that. The murder on tape.
Yeah, a murder that we don't really know about.
Capo. We got in trouble earlier for saying not capo, and so we had to get fixed. So
yeah,
that's
yeah. No, I don't know. So like, what I find interesting with going back to I guess you can call him Gene Pontecorvo.
We call him Gene.
If you're like close to him, is there's two references at least to like, well, what if Tony were dead? Right. And this kind of like, okay, what are the things that are impeding you from being happy and being fulfilled or whatever, right? So like there's like he says kind of in passing, like, well, you know, maybe to his wife, like, well, maybe in 2 years, like maybe Tony will be gone. Right. She also, you know, encourages him to shoot him in the face or something like that. She says something pretty strong.
Pretty strong suggestion.
But it's like, yeah, it's like, you know, it's these blocks that people have to pursuing their dreams kind of, and they've gotten themselves in that situation. But it's just tragic. It's like a tragic story.
Yeah.
Yeah, you suddenly are like invested in this family being able to go move to Florida.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. There's also that moment, the other moment that kind of stood out for me for Eugene dealing with a lack of empathy from the people around him and being kind of in this prison is right after he's told the decision from Syl and he's around Vito, and then Vito's coming out and talking about himself maybe being boss.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just completely no empathy coming from the people that.
Yeah, even like having Syl tell him, right? Like that's cold.
Yeah.
You know, and again, like for these guys who we find out have this really long history, right? Like Tony won't even like tell him to his face.
Yeah.
It's pretty rough.
Pretty cold.
It's pretty rough.
Okay.
But I think for me, like the tie-in to Tony is like all characters kind of have these, whether it's like an actual like physical blockade to doing something that makes them happy, or like a psychological block to being able to do something. I think like we go back to Melfi's office here in this episode where, you know, they are still like revisiting Tony's mother.
Yeah.
And, you know, his perspective, right? Like it's so hard for him to, you know, and he's dealing with like, you know, some similar issues with Junior, right? Like it's brought up a lot of the same issues that he was having surrounding his mother, right? This person who at one point tried to kill him.
Yeah.
This person who is family and ostensibly is supposed to have your back, right?
Yeah.
Is supposed to like support you and love you. We've had like references to that in, you know, with Junior and Tony's relationship in other seasons, in other episodes. But, you know, the fact that Tony can't get past the fact that it, like his mother and his uncle would try to kill him. He just internalizes it and turns it into his own like kind of battle, but he doesn't actually grapple with that. Yeah. The feeling of kind of like, I don't know, like betrayal or, I can't even quite put words to it, right? But he's like refused to kind of grapple with that, and he can't move on and have other relationships.
Yeah.
Until he grapples with that. Like, you know, he just fills his life with sushi now.
Right. Which sounds pretty good.
I mean, that sushi did look good.
If I could go to a, you know, $40 per fish sushi place all the time, I'd be pretty happy. Yeah. I actually truly believe I would be happy if I could do that all the time. I truly believe in my happiness.
Yeah. It would be really good.
Yeah, I don't think that's a superficial
maybe he's doing the right thing.
So maybe Tony's doing the right thing. Maybe we're reading this wrong. Maybe Tony's doing great.
Yeah, he seems to be doing great until he gets shot. Yeah, there's a lot around food in this episode. Just like speaking of the sushi.
Yeah.
And I haven't quite like kind of like wrapped myself around it yet. But there's Agent Harris and his parasite.
Yeah.
And him getting this veal on a hero.
Well, there's always a lot about like stature and weight and size too. So I mean, like comparing Agent Harris to that scene where Tony's on the scale. Yeah. Which is obviously acknowledging the fact that James Gandolfini has gained weight going into this season from where we left off. But it's interesting because actually that scene of Tony on the scale actually reflects his psychological condition and what he's going through in therapy, because he starts taking off his clothes as if that's the problem, right? Yeah. He's blaming other things for this, but at the same time, it's clearly his responsibility. It's clearly his decisions that have led him to be this person, to be this kind of like, to have this stature, and you know, he doesn't take accountability for it. But it's interesting, you know, to have Tony as this kind of like larger than life, enormous presence on the show, and Agent Harris is also like kind of the opposite of that, representing different kinds of people and different lines of work. It's interesting.
Well, like what are the implications on your body for living certain, I don't know, for like living a certain lifestyle, right? So like, I don't know. I can't quite. It's like stomach oriented. I can't like the symbol. Like I can't quite articulate the symbolism, but there's just something about like the stomach and like Vito with his Atkins diet,
right?
Like
there's a lot. Just
eating, which is like heavy in meat, right? Like you know, no carbs,
right?
Just meat kind of diet. Right. You know,
which we see him eating just a hot dog,
just a sausage, just a wiener.
Yeah. Wiener diet.
Yeah, like, he's probably on that too.
Probably.
We have, like, you know, Carmela and Angie going to Vesuvio's, and like he's bringing them a free dessert. The other guys are the guys are at Vesuvio's. They're complaining about the food, like the quality is not that good.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just kind of this like stomach imagery.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting too, actually, that like the quality of Vesuvio's not being as good, drifting away from that Tony who we've seen in that environment so much, now going to this sushi place. Somebody's kind of closed-minded and has very kind of like a narrow view on cultures, and doesn't really see outside of his small world that he lives in. The fact that he's actually expanded to even eating Japanese food also reflects like the time that we're in and how time has passed, and he maybe can't escape how different cultures have come closer to him. Because I think in 1999 when the show started, he wouldn't have ate there. He would have had opinions about it as like foreign and weird. Whereas later on, I think that it's kind of inescapable and it's more okay because time has passed and America has changed.
Yeah.
And it's integrated more of these other cultures and their influence through food.
It goes back even to like, I don't know, we've had it in past seasons. Like, I need to just like think on it more. And that's the one downside of doing these right after watching is sometimes I like come up with smart things a lot later on. But it makes me think back also to like Adriana's stomach problems last season.
Yeah.
And how that was kind of linked with Tony as well when he had that melanoma or whatever it was that was removed from his head.
Yeah.
And yeah, just this like, like, I don't know. Yeah, there's something. Stomachs. I'll work on it.
Okay, maybe we still have time.
If you guys have any ideas about stomachs, let us know.
If you have any stomach thoughts.
Yeah, but it's definitely, for me, it really like, that was a symbol that really hit me. And that's the thing. That's the thing I like about this show. And again, like this episode, we're dating ourselves so much in doing it because we just watched the stupid Game of Thrones
finale.
Shouldn't
even say its name anymore.
I know, but like that's the thing about this show that's so great is like they're not fucking hitting you over the head with like some kind of symbol that you can like, you know, figure out, and you're like, hooray, I've cracked it. Like everything is just, it's like, I don't know. Maybe it's me just looking into it too much and trying to go too deep on everything, which I'm inclined to do. But I also think it's just like, it requires so much from the viewers to like either make connections or not, or to, you know, like feel things or not. I don't know. It doesn't try to hold your hand at all.
No.
It doesn't care if you understand
the
symbols or not. It's a little bit like Twin Peaks or something like that in that way too, right? Like it's like it's not gonna tell you the answer.
No, and there probably isn't even an answer. The point is almost like nestled in the
well, that's the thing. That's what it's about, right? It's like it's about that kind of, again, that fourth wall thing is like, we're looking at you like, are you gonna fall for this and try to decode this, like, because then we've got you, like, this is what this is about, is this desire to figure things out and this desire for answers, right? And
I think that's always at the heart of this show, and that's always more important than answering any little puzzle that they throw at you or deconstructing, you know, a meaning, because I think that's not really the point. We can endlessly... I know. I mean, those, like, I know there are some people who are listening to this that are first-time viewers, so I'm trying to be really careful with talking about things in this season. But just the fact that this episode is called Members Only. Right. Well, that's a really... is one of those things that, like, again, I feel like it's kind of like a treasure trail. Like, it's like David Chase being like, are you going to buy into, like... What kind of connections are you making for yourself? Yeah, and there's for those of you who have watched this before, you know what I'm talking about. But it's not even going forward from where we are right now. It's also going backwards. Totally. Like, Members Only links us to the very last episode of the series. Totally. But I think there's also so much effort in this episode to link us to earlier parts, especially the first season. Yes. I mean, in particular, you know, there's this mention of Pussy Malanga, Tony Pillow to his mother. You know, Tony also saying, like, it's a nursing home, not a retirement. Were you just reading your note, Tony Pillow to his mother? Yeah. Tony Pillow to mother. nursing home.
Yeah, okay, I thought that's what you were doing.
Yeah, that's what I was doing. I was just reading it. That was my note.
Okay.
If you guys are interested in what my notes read like, that's it.
Tony pillow to his mother.
Tony pillow to mother.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, also all these references to things that happened at other times in the show. And I think that there is all these connections that are there to be made. And there is validity to it. There is a linking of this final season to the beginning of the show too. And I think maybe even like a return to some of the themes that are kind of set out as the show began. And this kind of like bookending that I think is actually done really successfully in this show that isn't always done successfully in shows. But they're linking beginning and end, and they're kind of like completing the cycle.
Right.
But then they're also linking forward, and you wouldn't even realize it if it was your first episode. I remember last viewing where Vito's bought his green jacket and Eugene is wearing his members only jacket, and this episode is called Members Only, and just like slaving over like what does it mean, you know. And I don't even think it's a spoiler. Like in the last episode, basically like there's a guy in a members only jacket and a lot of theories around it.
Yes.
I don't think I'm going to spoil the end of the show by saying there's a guy in a members only jacket.
Yeah, well, that's, it's true.
It's about it.
Yeah.
It's about it. That's
Good.
about what
Good.
it is.
You're right.
But that's fascinating, right? Because a guy in a members only jacket is at a pivotal scene of the series finale. The first episode of the final season is called Members Only.
Yeah.
Eugene buys this members only. So
he's had this members only jacket for a long time.
He's had this members only jacket. But it is interesting in the context of this episode, and I think that's all that we can examine right now. It's, well, what does this concept of members only mean? And for Eugene Pontecorvo, obviously he's in this prison of the members of the mob. And this institution of really, I mean, this family that only allows these members is something that...
Well, it seems like this...
he's indebted to, but also enslaved by.
Yeah, well, because it's kind of like saying like members only. It's like this exclusive kind of club, right? Where like, you go back to the scene where he and Chris were made, for example, right? Like it's like now you're part of this exclusive club and like you're part of this family and like you're protected by us and you're whatever, and that doesn't
but what did that really bring? And that was something that those characters were chasing too, like much like characters are chasing happiness now through these other superficial things. I mean, Chris's path to that point is being obsessed with being made, becoming a member, and ultimately he's not that happy with it. Yeah,
I mean, like like Eugene sees Chris become a captain for him and stuff like that, and so like even within that structure, there's more exclusive. Like it's like you buy into one level and then they make you want the next level up, and it's kind of like this.
Yeah, it's like Scientology.
Yeah, it's just like Scientology, members only. But it doesn't talk about like how do you get out of your contract with the club that you've joined. What are you signing away when you sign up for that? Yeah. Right? And this concept of like joining a club that you can never leave is really interesting. And I think like as this season goes forward and we have and part B of the season, and we have a lot more references to, again, like the afterlife and stuff like that. Like it's kind of I don't know. For me, it really highlights like what parts of your fate or your like future are determined, and like kind of like where do your choices kind of lead you then, and what does that take away from you as you keep going on? Like what's the path you're on? So I don't know. The one thing about Eugene that I forgot to say when we were talking about him was there's that scene where he's rubbing the blood off his face in the rearview mirror and rubbing it onto the map. Compared
to also Tony with the blood on the phone. I think that was another thing that was like kind of connecting those two for me. Phones.
We forgot about phones.
Colors.
I haven't talked about phones in a long time as a symbol.
It's true. It's been a minute.
It's been a sec. But we have him like really having to work really hard to get this spot off of his face, right? Which you were saying is very Macbeth, which it is. But like it is kind like for me that kind of highlights that aspect is like you can't get clean, right? Like you can't undo the things you've done and that choice that you've made. You're there. It's on you for good.
damn spot.
Yeah. I don't know about like the wiping it onto the map.
Right.
Just trying to think about that one.
Yeah.
Because they really focus you on that. And the 2 lines of his fingers on the map.
Well, where is he going, you know, in terms of like direction, like what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his
He's
road
being
is kind
guided
of
by
like
this
crossed.
violence, yeah.
Well, it's kind of like now coated in blood, right? Like
Yeah.
it's kind of
Well, and ultimately
foreshadowing.
that was always going to happen, yeah.
Yeah.
In many different ways.
Yeah. What else? Carm's Spec House.
Yeah, Carm Speckhouse. Pine, bad idea.
Pine, interesting. Like, you know, like, so this house is really associated with Adriana.
It is.
In this show. And, you know, even like, you know, like Pine, kind of like Pine Barrens, for example, right? Like it kind of
we have
like
the shot where, you know, the Spec House was shown in season 5 where it's through, you know, it starts with a shot on the top of trees, which makes us believe that we're where Adriana was killed.
Yeah, and we have her in the dream sequence there at the house with Carmela.
Yeah.
I always like try to figure that one out. I remember spending a lot of time last viewing trying to figure that one out. I think, you know, Carmela in her dream says like she's worried all the time. And I think this like kind of again like this dream of like building something that's kind of untouched by this world, right? We can see how that's not a reality, right? Like even though it's supposed to be this thing that's like Carm and her dad's project, right? Like they're trying to get Tony to call the guy to blah blah, the inspector.
Well, and the money is coming from Tony.
The money's coming from Tony, right? Like she hired / worked with her dad who clearly like didn't know the correct rules and stuff like that. And he also, you know, had been involved in some sketchy business, I guess. Like we kind of like we elucidate to that in the last season about his dealings with the construction industry and kind of the benefits that he's gotten. Right.
Yeah, that Tony has also been done things that benefited him.
But I do think like in terms of like with Adriana, like it's less like, I don't know, like is it this like otherworldly kind of like, how do I say it? Like this kind of like, again, this kind of like dream or like imagined happy place that's never really going to become that, right?
I mean,
like,
it doesn't seem that happy. Carmela seems pretty anxious.
No, she's pretty worried and anxious about it. But like, I think her dream of it, right? Like, remember last season when they got the blueprints of it and had this like his and hers closet, you know, like we can imagine that would be something that Adriana would have wanted in her in her life too. And kind of like in her afterlife, she's haunting it.
Right. Interesting. It's like Spectre.
Maybe like Spec House. Like Spec House is Spec. What have you got? I have just like now I'm out of practice, so I'm not being that coherent. But one of the, again, like coming off of watching other season finales, I love Ray Curto's death and then the jump right to his funeral.
Right.
I loved that.
It all happens very fast.
I just again like their
like,
storytelling.
Thank you for not wasting our time with some dumb bullshit.
Yeah, and also like
or also learning things through dialogue.
Yeah,
through like casual dialogue and people throwing out information that you can grab onto if you want and learn details, but not like fixating on details and showing you and spending time to oh wow, this is I'm Tyrion and now I see my brother and sister and now we spend a bunch of time on it.
Do you guys watch Game of Thrones? Let us know.
We're over it.
Let us know what you thought about the last season.
Yeah.
It's not worth our time doing a podcast.
No, we're spending too much time. We're done.
Yeah.
We won't ever talk about that show anymore on this show.
We couldn't escape. But yeah, with Carmela and this stop work order, right? Which is funny because we do have in past seasons like Tony and his crew dealing with stop work orders as this like source of conflict for them.
Right.
She's dealing with that same thing.
For me there was this aspect of power and control and class to a certain extent that was coming up in this episode. There were some interesting moments. I mean, Carmela using this Porsche over other characters around her.
Yeah. She's so lame sometimes.
Well, it was really interesting. So first of all, Carmela with her dad, with Hugh, that scene that you were talking about, and this kind of like facade of her control, and then maybe like that manifesting in other ways of having kind of power over other characters. And interestingly, that scene of Carm with her dad edits very quickly to Polly snapping at Artie, and we see a close up of his hand, like this kind
menus,
of like beckoning him, like this kind of like control over Artie. Even the control and the power that those characters have to criticize his food and his passion, where they can't cook, so I mean they
sometimes are cooking.
Polly is supposed to have pretty good gravy.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, it's their power to criticize and also to
consume
beckon and to consume and to kind of bring him over. But there's more than that. I mean, Carmela with the car when she goes to see Jenny Zach.
Yeah.
And the car is in the background of the shot she's talking about, and obviously that's
Jenny's
very
talking about like debt collectors calling
yeah, debt collectors.
Her,
I mean, it's in very bad taste, but Carmela's very excited when she's asking her about the card, saying it's beautiful. And interestingly, she's upset at the end when Angela shows her Corvette and shows her up. And I mean, what a window into a kind of
I like how you called her by her full name, Angela.
Angela does not make Carmela feel good.
Oh. I don't think anyone's ever called her that. I think they just call her Angie.
Okay, well, Angie
yeah.
has a car, and Carmela is not happy about
jealous.
it.
Yeah.
She's jealous. But I mean, as a personality characteristic, that's pretty lame. Because I mean, really, like, why would she be upset by Angie's success? Why is that off-putting? It's because it takes away her power over her, and the fact that she would be able to impress and have something that they don't have, which is in such poor taste, especially around the Sack family that's going through a lot of bad things right now.
Yeah, well, a lot of it with Angie, I think, is like related to the Spec House in some ways. Is like Carmela is trying to like. She's been trying for a long time now to like exert herself as her own person and like have power over something, and she's not being successful in it.
Right. Well,
and she was even like, you bought that for yourself, right? Like Tony bought her the Porsche.
Right.
She's never going to achieve that. And again, like she's kind of stuck.
She's striving though, because she has this dream of being independent and autonomous and having agency and control.
I mean,
and power
like she
and
says
money.
she has that dream.
Yeah, but she doesn't, and that's her burden. Like that is what she has to wrestle with, and that's why she's having these dreams where she's constantly anxious, probably in a lot of ways. But it's interesting because as a person, she's exerting that over other people in a way that isn't very flattering to herself.
No.
Yeah, we have some interesting things like Tony talking to AJ about your family is what matters most. Those values obviously kind of like infiltrating in different ways. I mean, there's the actual nuclear family, but then there's also the mob family. And it's, just kind of like zeroing in on those core principles of Tony Soprano and how they impact different things, because Eugene, being a member of this family, is actually having this very devastating effect on him, on his
family.
Nuclear family. But really, it's in the benefit of Tony's bottom line and these kind of like old, kind of arcane rules and
yeah. No, it is. It's how do I say it? I just can't put words to it really. It's like it's just like it's so self-centered, right? Like we know that Tony is self-centered, but like he's unable to make connections between the things that have gone on in his own life or the things that he's saying out of one end of his mouth,
right?
And he can't see. He can't pass that on to the people. It's just all about him, right? And so like he can't see like on one hand saying family is so important, and on the other hand like not letting a man go to take care of his own family. Yeah, it's just so backwards. You just can't trust anything he says. Really, it's just all in service of what serves him.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Interestingly, at the same time, in the way that we've had for these other characters, right before he's shot, for me, there's this moment of him going to Junior, making him food, making the pasta. There is this, like, it's small, but there is something, at least, of him giving to somebody in his family, to somebody that he cares about. He's doing something for someone. Even if it does come out of probably spiting Bobby and Janice.
Yeah.
He is still there. It's a small moment, but it's more flattering than pretty much anything else we get for him in the episode.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I forgot to mention when I talked about food that there's a mention of a Chinese restaurant in Mill Basin.
Mill Basin. Not too far from where we are now.
Kind of near to where we live now.
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of. It's near the Home Depot.
I mean, we didn't know what Mill Basin was when we were doing season 5. Last time you heard from us, we didn't know what Mill Basin was. Now we do, because we're close enough, and we had to go to Home Depot.
Many times.
Yeah, in fact, it's good. It's good timing. It's a good thing we waited, because there's a lot of Brooklyn intersections showing up in season 6.
Right.
And we're going to be able to reference them a lot better.
Great.
It's great.
It's really great. I don't know. Do you have anything else? There's a lot. I mean, I feel like we didn't go into everything.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot. We missed a Brooklyn reference earlier in the show because we didn't live here. I think it's King's Plaza.
Oh yeah, King's
Yeah.
Plaza.
Mm-hmm.
Super. Also near to Mill
King's
Basin.
Plaza. Yes.
So I guess
also.
they hung out down there.
Right. I guess that's where the Brooklyn mob is. Maybe we'll see some people. We'll tell you guys if we have any experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, who was it? Carmine goes walking there.
Right. I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was an
Thank
okay
you for listening.
first episode back.
We're happy to be back. I feel very inarticulate, so
Me
thank
too.
you for dealing with us.
Yeah.
But we're very happy to be back. We love this show. We love talking about it. And there's not that much left, so it's crazy. We're going to give it our all for season 6.
Yes.
See you next time.
And hopefully we talk to more of you, because that's fun too.
Yeah. Talk to us. We like talking to you and about
Yeah.
Sopranos.
And thank you for those of you who wanted to know if we were okay.
Yeah, we're fine.
But we emailed you back. Or we will.
Actually, I don't think we have yet.
Okay,
but
we will.
We'll
It
work
was just
on
today.
We'll work on it. We're fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.